Today, I'm going to be grading every single team's World Cup performance. This is going to be a bit of a long video, but I'm going to try and be quick with each of these grades. I'll be grading these teams based on three criteria. First, their expectations going into the tournament. Second, their actual performance based on those expectations. And third, the general vibes around the team. I'll put all these together and give them a letter grade. So without further ado, let's get to it. So to make things easier, and so I don't forget anybody, I'm just going to do this in order of the groups, starting with Group A, obviously, and Mexico. I'm going to give Mexico an A. They were arguably everyone's favorite host country. The vibes were insane for the whole tournament, and they performed really, really well. They won the group. They didn't concede a single goal until they met England, which is when they lost 3-2. So overall, a great tournament for them. Secondly, South Africa. I'm going to give South Africa a B because I don't think many people expected them to get out of the group. And sure, they didn't get far after that, but just making it out of the group, I think, deserves a high grade. Then South Korea, they're getting our first F because they played terribly. They got knocked out of the group stage, and the vibes were awful. Back in South Korea, they didn't even want to see the coach. They blurred his face when he was interviewed on TV. Just horrible. And finally, Czech Republic, they're getting a D. Their expectations were not too high, but finishing bottom of the group is still pretty bad. Next up is Group B. I'm giving Switzerland an A. They made it all the way to the quarterfinals, where they lost to Argentina. No shame in that. Really good performances all across the board. Getting past Colombia on penalties, that was a big accomplishment as well, because that was a tough game. Then Canada is also getting an A, because they were a host country. Vibes were great. They got out of the group, which some people didn't think they would. And they made it to the round of 16, where they lost to Morocco. Again, no shame in that. Morocco are one of the best teams in the world. Then Bosnia, I'm giving Bosnia a C, because they got out of the group, which, again, not many people thought they would. But then they lost immediately in the round of 32 to the USA, and they sparked the whole Fuller and Balogun controversy. And finally, Qatar, I'm giving them a D. It's not an F, because yes, they finished bottom of the group, but they got their first ever World Cup point, which is something cool that they can remember from this tournament. Group C, Brazil, get a D. They made it to the round of 16, but lost to Norway. But for Brazil, making it to the round of 16 is not an accomplishment at all. They would have wanted to go much further than that. Morocco get a B. Sure, getting to the quarterfinals is great. Probably should deserve an A, but just based on what they did in the last World Cup, they might have thought and hoped and wanted to go a bit further. Then Scotland get an A, purely based off vibes. Scottish fans were arguably the most fun fans in the whole tournament. They took over Boston. It was incredible. Even though the team didn't do that well, I'm still giving them an A. And Haiti get an F because they finished bottom with no points. Group D, USA. I'm giving the USA a C. It would be a higher score if not for the whole Balogun controversy, but I think that put a damper on what had been up to that point a pretty good World Cup for the US. And then, of course, getting thrashed by Belgium was not a pretty look. Then Australia, I'm giving Australia an A because I and other people did not think they would make it out of the group. But they finished second, and then lost to Egypt on penalties in the round of 32, but getting out of the group is still good for them. Paraguay, I'm giving an F, not necessarily because of anything they did on the field. They did get out of the group, which is impressive. They beat Germany, but the France game and what happened after the France game is the reason they're getting an F. Tactics were disgusting. They did not even play soccer or football, whatever you want to call it. They played a disgusting game. And what was even more disgusting were the comments from their politician after the match about Kylian Mbappe. Just vile and gross. And that's why they're getting an F. And finally, Turkey, also getting an F, but this time because of on the field. They were just awful. Group E, Germany, it's another F, losing to Paraguay in the round of 32. Need I say more? Ivory Coast get an A. They were a surprise package, and sure they didn't get too far after the group stage, but I think their performances in the group, pushing Germany all the way, getting good results, they were a fun team to watch, especially with Yan Diomande. Ecuador get a B. Getting out of the group, beating Germany, great. Losing to Mexico in the round of 32, not as great. And Curacao get a D. It was their first ever World Cup. That's the only reason they're not getting an F. Netherlands, getting an F to start off Group F. Very fitting. They lost to Morocco in the round of 32. That is definitely way earlier than they would have wanted to exit the tournament. Japan get an A. First of all, their fans, probably the nicest, most respectful, and also that one video of the Japanese fan trying barbecue and going crazy, that was one of my favorite videos from the whole World Cup. So, just love Japan. Even though they didn't get too far in the tournament, the vibes were great. Sweden get a C because they got out of the group but did nothing after that. And Tunisia get an F because they literally fired their coach after one game. Group G, Belgium get an A. They had a horrible start to the tournament. They looked really sluggish and slow and didn't really have much going for them. Then they turned it on, made it all the way to the quarterfinals, and scored the only goal that anybody in the whole tournament scored against Spain. Spain only conceded once, and it was to Belgium. So for that, they get an A. Also getting an A is Egypt, because they went a lot further than I think a lot of people thought they would, and losing to Argentina in such a heartbreaking fashion, they arguably should have held on to win that game. There was a lot of controversy, a couple of calls that I personally think went very much in Argentina's favor and should not have, but that's a story for another day. Egypt still get an A for their performance at the tournament. Iran get a C. Sure, they didn't get out of the group, but technically they went undefeated, 3 draws. And also, all the criticism and all the discrimination and just the terrible treatment that they received while in the US, they still managed to put on a relatively decent performance. And New Zealand get an F because they finished bottom and didn't really do anything. Group H, Spain, the champions, they get a B. I'm just kidding. They get an A. Obviously they get an A. Cape Verde also get an A. Vibes, performance, relative to the expectations, they check all the boxes. Expectations were on the floor. It was their first ever World Cup. Not only did they draw Spain, but they got out of the group, and they nearly knocked out Argentina. They were this close to knocking out Argentina, which would have been amazing for many reasons. So, vibes were great, performance was great, and I'm excited to see what Cape Verde do in the future. Uruguay get an F, because they didn't make it out of the group. And in a group with Cape Verde and Saudi Arabia, many people, including myself, expected them to get out of the group. Saudi Arabia get a D, because yes, they finished bottom, but relative to the expectations, that's probably not too far off. Group I, France get an A. Sure, they got knocked out in the semifinals, but it was to the eventual champions. And yes, they lost the third place game, but that game was crazy, 6-4. They honestly looked dead in the first half, being down 4-0, but making it a game just for that. Not to mention Mbappe, his personal accolades, Golden Boot, and taking Messi's crown as the World Cup's all-time leading goal scorer. So for that, France get an A. Norway also get an A, because again, they check every box. Expectations, they surpassed them. Performance on the field was great. And vibes, immaculate. Whether it was the row, or just Holland memes, or just the fans in general being awesome, Norway were amazing at this tournament. I actually was in Norway during the tournament, so got to watch a couple games up there, and it was super fun. Senegal, I'm giving a B, because maybe they would have wanted to do a bit more, but they did get out of the group, and with France and Norway in the group, that wasn't a guarantee. And Iraq get an F, bottom with no points. Group J, Argentina get a C. Yes, they made it all the way to the final, but their expectations and the script, if there was one, which I think there was for Messi to win another World Cup on US soil to end his career. That didn't happen. So for that, they get a C. Also because their tactics in the final were pretty brutish and gross, and I did not enjoy watching them play. Austria get a B. They got out of the group. Sure, they lost in the round of 32, but that was to Spain, so no harm in that. Algeria get a C because they got out of the group, but then they lost to Switzerland. And while losing to Spain, no shame in that, losing to Switzerland, especially in the way they did it without putting up much of a fight, that's a bit more of a problem. And Jordan get an F, bottom with no points. Group K, we're almost done. Colombia get an A because they won a group with Portugal in it, which is impressive. And beyond that, they put on a fairly decent performance in the knockout. Portugal get a C because in Ronaldo's last World Cup, they would have wanted to go further than the round of 16. And sure, they lost to the eventual champion Spain, but that won't be any consolation to Ronaldo or his fans. DR Congo get an A because they got out of the group, which frankly is a lot more than people thought would happen. And they pushed England all the way. That game was really close. And finally, Uzbekistan get a D because yes, they finished bottom. Yes, no points, but it was their first ever World Cup. So it was just cool for them to be there. And finally, Group L, England get an A because they finished third in that crazy game. And I think, sure, they might have wanted to get to the final. They might have had dreams of winning the World Cup, but truthfully, getting third, I'd say is pretty on par for the expectations. They were fun to watch. They beat Norway in a crazy game. Good World Cup for them. Croatia get a D. They got out of the group, but then they lost to Portugal. And for a team that was recently in a World Cup final, was recently in a World Cup semifinal, they definitely would have wanted to get much further in the round of 32. Ghana get a C because they got out of the group, but lost immediately after in the round of 32. So, average. And Panama get an F because they didn't score a single goal and finished bottom of the group with no points. So that's it, guys. Hopefully this video isn't too long. Let me know in the comments, what do you think of these grades? Would you grade any teams differently? And did you enjoy the World Cup? I think it was a pretty awesome tournament with a very deserving champion and some great games and great moments along the way. I will be reacting to my World Cup predictions later in the week, so stay tuned for that. I'll see you soon. See ya!